Hello, everybody. I'm Phil Brandt, President and CEO of AIM Employers Association, and welcome to This Week at Work.
Welcome to This Week at Work, the only show to pack workplace news, practical HR solutions, and timely insights into every 30-minute episode.
HR is involved in almost every workplace change there is, with businesses merging, selling, CEO changes, policy changes, politics, federal level, state level, local level. Tons of organizations going from work from home to hybrid to return to the office. We work in a constant state of change, and that change impacts our workplaces in ways we can't even imagine. We would like to be better this year than we were last year, and that means people have to do something different in order to get a better outcome. We're talking about change.
Ask your burning questions. So what's keeping you up at night? Let's face it together now on This Week at Work.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. Happy to be here with you. And we have some change going on today, and it's positive change. You're going to like it. Bert Garland's not with us. And we have Tanya Zion back by popular demand. Welcome back, Tanya. Or Tanya, how are you today?
I'm doing great this morning, Phil. Thanks for having me back.
We're happy to have you. I know you're in town working with several of our members, so we wanted to take this opportunity while Bert was out to have you on the program. And I know you're constantly working with our members in the space of change, so this is a perfect topic. And sometimes even we get lucky and the stars align, and I feel like this is one of those moments. So let's talk about change. I don't know about you, but change for me in my career, as I look back, it really has taken different shapes, right? So I can go back to the early 90s when I started working, and we had workplaces that was really filled with, a high level of trust. And we were just coming out of this space of like employment for life, which, started to change in the 80s and 90s. And now we don't even think about employment for life at all. I just came off a roundtable tour through Illinois and Indiana, and I'm back here last night. And each of the roundtables that we had, and we had some great conversations, and I asked how many people started a new job in the last 5 years. I mean, pretty, since COVID basically. And I'm going to guess 90% of everyone in the room raised their hand that they had started a new job in the last 5 years. That's massive change. I mean, massive, and that's a group of HR professionals, business leaders, and all of those spaces, and they exist primarily because we're dealing with change all the time. And going back to my story to the 90s, leaders, managers told us things, and we believed them. And we trusted, the information source that we have. And now we look at our lives today and where we're at, and I see things. And the last thing we do is trust, right? The first thing we do is fact check. So I have this scenario at home. I don't know what happens with you and your family, but with my family, it used to be when my children were young, I would say things and they would say, oh, Dad said, therefore it was true. Kind of like me in the 90s. Management said, therefore that's true. And we were all okay. Just believe what they told you. So today I tell my kids things, and now all my kids are young adults and they're having children and they all live out of the house. But nevertheless, we spend lots of time together. And as soon as I give them a piece of information and say, did you know that there were dire wolves that were recreated for the first time in the last 13,000 years they've been extinct? And my daughter's like, oh, that is not true, Dad. And she starts fact checking me. And then nevertheless, she's like, oh my gosh, it's true, right? But that happens in work the same way. You tell people something, and then all of a sudden, they don't believe it's true. They want to know for themselves and get their level of certainty around that. So it's amazing how change is playing out in the workplace. And I know you're dealing with it specifically on a daily basis. So as you're digging in with it, what are some of the noticeable differences you've seen over the last 10, 15 years in the space of change?
I think you really touched upon it, that there used to be, I think, just society, right? We believed when we heard things, and we could probably spend the next few hours on dissecting why that isn't the case anymore. But I think people have access to information in a way that they haven't ever had before. And so I think it's natural for people to be curious. It's natural for them to do their own research. And I think that's one of the things that I've seen. The other thing that I think is just a little bit different in today's workforce is this sense of autonomy. You hear me talk about all the time on the show, we bring our whole selves to work. And I don't know about you, Phil, but I never encountered that term the whole time I was coming up through school, right? And, in first and second grade, my kids were bringing home worksheets that looked like this. So this idea of autonomy and how we show up in the places that we go, I think leads to this whole idea of, now I call it among my mom friends, hashtag trust but verify, right? As my kids were
Okay.
growing up, I trust you, but I want to verify it. And
I don't think in my scenario there's trust. I think it's I want to prove dad wrong. Yeah.
well, and I do think that to me says, Phil, you're a great dad, that there's a comfort level of being able to challenge. And I do see that in workplaces too. If employees are openly challenging, there's a certain level of trust there, or else they wouldn't do it, right? For fear of repercussion.
I'm
So,
going to use that one
okay.
this weekend, I'm sure, when that starts happening and then someone says, I'm going to check that. I'm going to say, I'm glad you trust me enough to check that. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm glad that we can have this open dialogue. But that's really the big thing. I think employees have access to information in a rate that they never have before. And I think the idea of really explaining the why is important. And when I work with organizations, those are sort of where they miss, right? They miss on giving some of the background. And sometimes I think leadership can take a little bit more out of the empathy bucket to really look at, wait a minute, how does this really impact my employees? And I don't think change management is natural. I don't think project management is natural. It's not something we just roll out of bed and we have a leadership title and we're like, oh, I'm an expert at this. And so, like so many things that we do in organizations, if we don't have a clear-cut process, if we don't have communication channels, what I see on the other end of it is a huge impact to employee engagement when we don't have good change management principles in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we think about workplace, and you and I were talking on the pre-program, there's a lot of sense of when I go to work, I'm not looking for the world to change, right? It's maybe an escape from the
Yeah.
world and all the change that is bombarding me every day in every channel that I'm exposed to is something different, something trying to get my attention. It's in extreme expression so that I click on it and, and I help somebody make money by clicking and getting news sources. And so therefore I go to work and it's like, oh, it would be nice if I can just do my job. And
Yeah.
then we introduce change. And I think at that point, it's like I've had enough. And if they are in a trusting environment, they do express that to your point, right? And if they're
Yeah.
not, they're going to hold that in and eventually it's going to come out at some point and we're going to get like, my mom used to say, the whole kitchen sink. I'm still not sure what that expression means, but we got the whole, everything including the kitchen sink. But nevertheless, when change occurs in the workplace, we often don't follow a process for change. And I think that's because my opinion is that, we as leaders are conditioned to change. And we often receive change in little bits of information over a long period of time until it leads to a segment or a point in time where it's like, now it's time to make a change. And that might be months or even years later from when we first got a very early piece of information. And then we introduce the change and we move forward and we expect people to move through that change relatively quickly so we can get on to newer and better things. And I always keep the bell-shaped curve in mind of, early adopters, late adopters. Well, I might be an early adopter because I've already gone through the cycle of change management before I've ever introduced it. And then I don't understand why people who are hearing it for the first time are not on board, right? And they're fact checking me. So when I think of those things, I think of like a model to use. And again, I would also emphasize that not every leader has even been through change management. You think about it, that's really scary. Most leaders have not. And when I ask HR professionals, have you been through change management training, proper change management training? Some will go right away, oh, I have, right? And then others kind of go, because they want to say yes and they're trying to raise their hand, but they know that they haven't. And then others are just saying, no, I've never been through it. And these are our agents responsible for create or managing the change cycle. And
Yeah.
so I can see you got something you want to say about that, not having been properly trained.
Well, and I think this, especially for our listeners, right? That mid-sized business, because when we're a small business and everybody fits around the conference table, then it's really easy to manage change because, to your point, we've all been part of the conversations. But if you go to the other end of the spectrum and you look at large companies, they have entire departments around change management. They bring in consulting firms to do change management. And so the idea that as an HR professional, we're tasked with managing change. I keep talking about that employee supply chain. And, if we were in manufacturing and there were going to be impacts to our business that influenced the supplies we needed and how we needed things, we'd have a whole committee around that, right? We're good at that and responding to it. But when we think about human capital and the impact of change on that human capital as one of our inputs, we're just not really well trained for that. And so if you're an HR professional sitting and listening and going, oh my gosh, it's one more thing on my list, and why didn't I think about that I need to have change management? First of all, take a breath. It's okay. That's why we're here to help. But also acknowledge that it's not complicated. Phil, I think you say it all the time. What you're saying, it's easy, right? It sounds easy, but it's really difficult to pull off.
Simply complicated.
There we go.
Yes.
And so that's why I do think training is so important, having a model. And, I talk about people, process, and communication all the time. And if you don't have good change management processes from the beginning, you're going to spend a whole lot of time communicating to people. And so I think really what we're here to say today is look at that change management process. Does it even exist? If it doesn't, let's learn about it and figure out how to implement it, because in the long term, you're going to save the organization and yourself a whole lot of panic conversations.
Absolutely. And maybe to help with that, before we get on to a few elements here on change management cycle, is we have developed for the first time, because we recognize, particularly in that space, and a lot of our audience comes from the human resource space, but for that professional, we've designed a change management program just for HR professionals, right? So we've taken our standard change management program and reconfigured it to help the HR professional manage and process change through their workplace, which is super exciting. It's the first time we've ever offered something very narrow, targeting one type of leader, in this case, the HR leader, on such a broad topic like change. And that program will be offered April 24th, the morning of April 24th. You can go to the website, sign up for that. It's live online. So it doesn't matter where you're joining us from, you'll be able to attend that program. I think it's going to be an awesome program. This is not the program for your supervisors or other coworkers. This is only for HR professionals. We have other change management programs in there for the rest of the staff or the organization, should you choose to do that. But that's just a reminder for that group. April 24th, a great program, first time offering, and those are usually very popular. All right, so let's have some fun. When we talk about change in the workplace, and we're always going through it, Bert and I like to do this as well, Tanya. So I got 5 ways to master change, and I'm going to go through them kind of one at a time, and I'm going to give you 3 possible answers. All 3 answers are right. There's no wrong answer in this, but I'm curious which one resonates the most with you and why, particularly with all your experience. So we'll start with that, and we kind of go through this model. It's called the SCARF model. So it starts with S, status, right? Protect and evaluate, perceive, value. That's what status is. So here's the question. How can we administer change in a way that avoids employees feeling their role, expertise, or importance is diminished due to the change? And here's your 3 options, Tanya. Again, all of them are right, so you're going to be a guaranteed winner. The first one is acknowledge contributions and expertise before introducing the change. The second one is frame the change as an opportunity for growth and development. And then the third one is provide recognition and positive reinforcement throughout the process. Which one of those three do you like the most and why?
Really feel like this is an unfair quiz. I'm just going to put that out there, right? They're all right. But I'm going to go with the first one, acknowledge contributions and expertise before introducing the change. And here's why. If you think about just the financial situation of most employees in the United States, their job is their lifeline, right? If their job disappears tomorrow, then they don't, I mean, the stats are out there. Most people don't have 6 months of savings in the bank. They don't have like this runway. And so when I think about my job, the first thing I'm looking at is security, right? Herzberg even tells us that, right? When we think about engagement, we need to feel secure. And so anytime a change comes up, I think there's this immediate response that it can feel like a threat to that identity at work. And so even if their role shifts, even by a little bit, we are defaulted to perceived danger, right? And so we're going to say, do I still matter? Am I being evaluated, right? When AI came out, what were all of the headlines? We're not going to need workers in 5 years, right? Which we know is not true. And so I think acknowledging we're doing a really good job here. We really appreciate the time and talents that you give us. And then we can go on to framing how the change is going to be an opportunity. And then we should be providing recognition along the way. But the starting point is because of the work that you've done and the value that we brought, now we get to do more and we get to do it more efficiently. So that's where I'd start.
Yeah, and I like that, particularly when you say because of the great work that we've done. And sometimes we're making changes and it's not because of the great work we're done. It's because of legal reasons, or it's because the government is making a mandate in some way, or something along that line. But it's still important to recognize. And I know myself, I'm not one that easily recognizes great work of people. I recognize it, but I don't verbalize it. I don't express it too easily. And being able to find and break it down, slow it down, break it down is another phrase I like to have, and say, okay, what are the 2 or 3 things I can say? Because we've done these things, we're well prepared for this change. There's a great example I like to use with this one that says, instead of saying we're restructuring roles, which is very frightening to people, we can say we're evolving our structure to better leverage our skills and expertise. And that feels a lot better than where we're going to have to restructure.
Yeah, and even more so if you can tie that back to a strategic plan and sprinkle in your values, right? I work with a lot of organizations that one of their values is innovation. And so how do we take a step back and root into what we have already promised to deliver on, right? So if our strategic plan involves innovation, guess what? We're going to have change that comes as a result of that. So how do we say, like, our strategic plan is to be innovative. In order to do that, this is what we need to do, and we need your expertise to make sure we do it well. As far as regulation, the one thing I would say too is there's a lot of that right now. And I would remind every leader that's on this call that your energy around that really matters. And so you may not agree with it, you may not like it, but it is. And so I think it's really important as leaders that we acknowledge it is. And as you said, we have a strong enough organization, we can absorb this change, and we're going to do it so it has the least burden on the organization as a whole.
Absolutely. And I think the other important thing to point out in that is that sometimes as leaders, what many people forget is we don't like the change either, or we haven't gone through the process of accepting the change. And we're still in a space of denial or anger, these steps of change that you get to before you ever get to acceptance. And at that point, we're introducing the change and we're leading it and we're still angry. So our emotions may show, and I know I feel that sometimes because I get very emotional, excitable, but I also get angry very easily as well. And managing that can be very difficult. So our friend Ashley down in Florida, she's asking us, is there a 1-pager resource? There's not, Ashley. It's a 2-pager, but we will get that to you, no problem. And this is something that we are and have been handing out in our roundtables as well that centers around change management. You also get that documentation and a whole lot of other models in the program that's scheduled on the 24th, but Ashley will get that to you, no problem. All right, so let's move on to number 2, all right, certainty. Provide clarity and reduce ambiguity. All right. How can you keep change from causing uncertainty? People fear the unknown, which can lead to an example of resistance, or can lead to anxiety and resistance, excuse me. So here's your three options, Tanya. Um, Clearly explain what is changing, why, and how it will affect individuals. Number two, provide timelines, next steps, and regular updates. Or number three, be transparent and answer questions openly. Which of the three do you like?
So I am going with number 4 on this, Phil, all of the above, but let's do them in
Okay.
order.
I like, you're introducing change here, Tanya.
I know,
That's,
I like
yeah.
it. The thing that I have been saying ad nauseum lately that I think is so important and it's resonating with people is that, if you study our brains, right, and how our brains function and develop, I know we're getting into like neuroscience right now, but I think it's important because this is how we process change, is that when we have a void, right? So a change is happening and somebody doesn't explain the why, right? That's why I like that point, right? We really need to clearly explain what is changing and why. And so often in organizations, we're not even clear about that. We don't get clarity around that.
Mm.
And then we introduce this change. And if you have maybe a shaky culture where people feel like there's a divide between us and them with leadership and employees, then I've watched it happen in real time. Change happens, we don't provide a clear why, and employees go, well, of course they did this, they don't care about us, right? It's a void, and our brain looks for patterns. And so the number one thing you can do as you're announcing change is to really sit back and think about your communication strategy. Why did we need to do this? What is the impact? And we're going to get to this in number 3 with autonomy, but hopefully in our process, we've also checked in with some thought leaders throughout the organization, some subject matter experts, so that we have credibility when we say what the impact is going to be. Because one of the things we see in the survey often is that employees will say, I don't really think leadership understands what I do. And they're making changes and they're making decisions about my job. And they say they care about me, but look what they did. I have to do 4 extra steps now. And so being able to acknowledge a change with credibility and explaining the why is critical. And then opening up that bi-directional communication. Can employees ask questions? Can they provide their input? What channels do you have to do that? And then finally, have a timeline and don't announce it once, right? This needs to be a project. It needs to be visible. If it's on your intranet site, it's a really simple timeline that we've hit some milestones. So love this, but get the why out there. It's so critically important.
All right, I do have to address just the chat line. People are asking for the document be made to everyone. All of our members who are listening, there's a great document that includes this. So Ashley, Deborah, as you're listening to this and you're asking, if you go on the AIM member resource page, right, and you log into if you don't have your password, just send a note to the team there and they'll get you logged in if you've forgotten your password. And you get onto the AIM member resource page, and there is a toolkit for change management that's designed for you, the HR professional or the business leader, and you can download that toolkit and use the SCARF model as well, some other models that we have in there to help go through and manage change in your workplace in a more comprehensive, conscious way versus we go at it with good hard work. So that's something there that will be available to you all, and I hope that helps all the others that are asking as well. Okay, number 3, Tanya, you ready?
Yep.
Autonomy. Give people a sense of control. People love to feel that they are in control, not someone else. How can you foster change in a way that still provides employees with a sense of control and autonomy? And we have 3 options. Involve employees in decision-making where possible. Offer choices in how they adapt to the change. For example, different training methods, phase transition, etc. Or encourage feedback and problem-solving input. 3 good choices, all correct choices. Which one do you like the most?
So I really think that 1 and 3 are in essence the same thing. And I like the way we word it better in 3, encourage feedback and problem-solving input. When change happens, no one likes to feel like change is happening to them. And that's one of the key principles in change management is at the very beginning of, rolling through these changes. Again, Who are your stakeholders? Who's going to be impacted? And oftentimes I hear leadership say, well, we can't involve the employee in every decision. 100% agree, right? There has to be leaders and decision makers. And if we're in a well-organized organization, we then need people to carry out and implement that. However, if we're talking about a big change, right, where it's going to impact several processes, it's going to have an impact on the way the employees do their work, this is where I think we need to have credibility in what we're saying. And the way we get that is we go talk to the people that the process is going to impact the change. And I don't see this happening a lot. So that would be my number one thing to do is, one, let's make change be proactive enough that we have time to do this. Because so often these strategic decisions, I don't see leaders having strategic time on their calendar. And suddenly we had 18 months to roll out a new process. Now we're down to 3 and we're rushing through and we're not bringing people with us. And in the end, we cost ourselves more time and productivity because we didn't get proactive on these change and solicit feedback.
And I think case in point here is most of us don't operate this way. And that means that the way that we operate and behave as leaders, we have to change first to be in front of the change. And most change that we're dealing with isn't immediate. When we look at it and we break it down and we study it, most of the change we're aware of long before we ever introduce it to the mass group of people.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean we worked on it for a very long time. Sometimes we didn't work on it until yesterday when we talked about it for the first time in a 30-minute meeting, and then we're going to problem solve it and introduce it and move on to the next problem by tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that's where, we get this clash and we go, well, what happened? It's, what's happened? And we don't understand. And I think that's the idea of being able to be in front of the change, which means we have to change ourselves. So I like this example. Instead of rushing through things and saying, we're implementing this new process, which people are like, oh, okay, it's implemented. Someone's already made a decision. It's much better if we can be in position to say, here's a new process we're considering. We'd love your input on the best way to implement it. So we know what we need because of the change, but we'd like to have some input on how we implement that. Again, it's giving people the sense of they are in part in control.
Yeah, and
All right.
everybody listening, I'm going to give you one tactic to make you look really smart in your next meeting. So the next time you're part of a leadership meeting, and this is all tied in, as you're coming up to about 10 minutes left in the meeting, I'm going to ask you to be really bold. And I'm going to ask you to step into that meeting and say, hey, we've got about 10 minutes left in the meeting. We've discussed a lot of things. I have 2 questions for us. What did we decide? Who needs to know? When you start implementing that in your leadership team meetings and really get clarity of what is prime time of we made a decision and who do we need to share it with, you're going to start to improve your change management. And it's going to start you thinking about how the decisions you're making are coming down in the organization. So those are the 2 questions I recommend.
All right, Tanya, rapid fire the next 2, right? Relatedness, strengthen social connections. How can we make change in a way that strengthens the sense of team and connection to others? People may feel disconnected, uncertain about new team dynamics, or worry about losing their support network. 3 options. Which one do you like the most, Tanya? Foster a sense of teamwork and shared purpose. Assign mentors or change champions to support colleagues, or create open forums for discussion and peer support.
Going to go with number 1. Change can feel isolating, but if you're building a community through this process, people are more likely to lean in, not opt out and be like, oh, they're doing it again. So I think we need to remind everyone that as the change comes, it's a we moment, not a we're doing this to you moment. And again, anchor that change in your mission and your values so that it makes sense that disruption really is worthwhile.
Yeah. Our friend Kenny Arnoff would say, the we, not the me, right? The famous drummer Kenny Arnoff. All right, last one before we go. Fairness. How do we introduce change in a way that feels fair to all involved? If employees feel decisions are being made without justification or that certain groups are unfairly affected, resistance will rise. All right, so here's what we have. 3 options. Clearly explain the rationale behind decisions, ensure consistency in how changes are applied across teams. And 3, provide avenues for employees to voice concerns and ask questions. Go.
So I'm eliminating number two. If anybody's been around business, we can't always apply things consistently among teams. That's just not possible. And so I really think that if you follow the steps we've talked about and get clear on the why, bring people into the decision making, even if it has an impact unfairly or perceived unfairly across teams, people are going to come along with you because tough decisions go down easier when people understand the why. And that transparency builds trust. And when we have trust, then even if there is a void, we're going to default to, all right, let's give them some time and see how it plays out. And it changes the narrative.
It's no wonder our members love working with you. You bring such good experience and knowledge and great reminders to us. I appreciate that. And on behalf of so many of the members that you work with, thank you, Tanya, for that. I know you are off to another member meeting right now.
I am.
So I'm going to let you go so you're not late. And I'm going to remind everyone that we do have our program set for April 24th. It's just for that HR professional, centers around change management. We're going to dive deep into these topics and discussions and give you some very good practical tools. And just like Tanya said, here's 2 things you can do to be a star. You're going to walk out of that meeting with a lot of information and learn how to help your organization and yourself move forward through the change that you have to lead. That's April 24th, the morning of. And until then, we will be back here next Thursday at 7:30. We'll see you then. Go out and let's be good to somebody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you once again for tuning in to This Week at Work. If you enjoy the show, please like it, share it, and make sure it's on your calendar. If you're an on-demand viewer, don't forget you can be part of the show by watching live at 7:30 a.m. Central every Thursday morning, when you can get your burning questions answered by using the question mark icon to the right of the player. In fact, you can ask a question now. Head over to aimea.org. Under Member Resources, you'll find This Week at Work. Click Listen Live to register for our next episode and submit a question. Or follow or subscribe wherever you get your news and entertainment. We'll see you next week when we discuss what's happening this week at work.